It's so good to be with you as we gather for another time of wandering toward wonder. I think we're live. I'm sorry we're running just a few minutes late today. We had some technical difficulties on my end, but it sure is good to be with you. My name is Will Ed Green. I serve as an associate pastor and the director of Boundary United Methodist Church in Washington, D.C. And this is Wandering Toward Wonder, a time that we set aside on Tuesdays at 10 o'clock to think together about how we're cultivating joy and wonder and hope in our lives. My goal is always to be able to share some just thoughts and reflections about where I've been doing that in my own life in hopes that that might spur that for you. And I would love to know where you're joining me from this morning as you come on. So, Michael, it's good to see you. I'm glad you're with us from Florida today. I hope you've got warmer weather down there than we do. And certainly, we want to know where everybody else is coming in from too, because your presence with us is a blessing. I'm tuning in today from my own little slice of Washington, D.C. in the Brightwood Park neighborhood. So go ahead and sound off in the comments. Let us know where you're coming in from so that we can celebrate your presence and continue building this community that we're building together. So, yeah, as we've entered this season of Lent, I've got to tell you that words have been on my mind a lot lately. I am somebody that loves words. I've loved words since childhood. But lately, I don't know about y'all, I have begun to find myself at a loss for words. And not just in terms of word recall, because I'm talking to approximately zero point 0.2 people in my own space or in person every day. But I'm also talking about the words that I would use to normally describe kind of what's going on in my life, how I'm feeling, what I'm doing, what I'm thinking. And for me, that's been really, really discombobulating. People who know me know that I love words. If you've ever read one of my emails, apologies to my staff friends who may be watching, you know that I want to make sure that I capture every single piece of information that's needed. And I love using words to do that. I love word play, alliteration, and used to love writing poetry. I love word games. There's not a word game that's been created that I've not played at some point or another. Maybe I've got some fellow word lovers out there. And if you're a word lover too, you'll know that words serve kind of like a security blanket of sorts, right? At least for me, they afforded me some agency to experience and interact with the world when things seemed really chaotic or unclear. And so, even in my childhood, I remember using my words through things like journaling and talking with friends to process really difficult moments of life, whether it was my parents' divorce or the death of a loved one. My words helped me feel like I was secure. And of course, that's not just true for me. As a society, we love our words. Not only does the act of naming, as we're reminded in the book of Genesis, when God invites Adam to name the creatures of earth, not only does the act of naming allow us exercise and exercise of power and agency over things, and even people, those words help us make sense of previously unencountered people, places, and situations, right? We love our frameworks to kind of fit people in and to fit situations in. So you can imagine for somebody like me and maybe like you that loves words so much, how discombobulating it's been to experience not just the kind of writer's block that keeps me from journaling or blogging, but the slow loss of language to help describe my daily life and experiences of the pandemic, right? It seems like, and I don't know about y'all, I'd love to know if this is true for you, that the longer this kind of Groundhog Day esque time goes on, the less and less the words that I previously used to make sense of it even feel like they apply anymore. It's as if there's this kind of slow melting of all the logic and the frameworks and the language that I've developed to help hold together this pandemic life. And what I'm left with is this kind of puddle, this word soup that I fish through to try to find the right words and oftentimes find that I can't. So I've been sitting with that today. I sat down yesterday to do some writing and just really wasn't able to get into it. And then I got to thinking about the invitation of Lent to strip away the extraneous stuff in our lives, about the invitation of Lent to simplify and to begin to let go of the stuff that we accumulate, that we sometimes falsely believe gives us a sense of place or space in the world so that we can be more open to what God is doing and speaking and inviting us into, not just in Lent, but throughout the year. And I was reminded as I was thinking about this invitation to strip away of folks like Zechariah, the husband of Elizabeth, who, when he found out that Elizabeth was going to give birth to a baby who would become John the Baptist, um, was struck deaf, and for the entire time that his wife was pregnant, was unable to speak. He was without words to speak, to say, to exercise his agency or his will in the world. I'm reminded about Elijah, who encounters God in the book of First Kings in a still small voice after the cacophonies of fires and earthquakes um, and great winds. I'm reminded of how Jesus stepped away regularly, away from places and spaces where the logic of his ministry, the work that was in front of him, um, was at its highest, at its hottest, and how in those spaces we read about Jesus sitting in the presence of God and praying and being still, and even when, if you remember the Transfiguration story, he's on the mountain and he's praying, and his disciples look up and they see him with Elijah and with Moses, and they're tempted for a moment to lock that minute in time, that moment in time, into place permanently, to build shelters, to protect what they've experienced and protect what they've come to understand in that moment. Jesus says no, forces them to step back from the frameworks, from the logic and the language that they want to use to capture that moment, because he knows that there's more to come. And so I wonder perhaps if, in a world that loves words, in a moment when words are failing us, if we're not being invited to set aside some of those things that we've used to previously insulate and protect us, if we're not being invited, maybe I'm not being invited, to use less words, and not just words to describe things or words in an email or words in a text message, but to actively try less hard to understand every single thing, and to instead simply practice the gift of presence, of showing up and trusting that God is there with me, even in that which I don't understand. And whether I've got words for it or not, God's promises of protection, guidance, presence that never fails or falters is going to be there, whether or not I've got the security blanket of my words wrapped around me. I think I'm beginning to find wonder in silence. I think I'm beginning to find wonder in unknowing as I strip away these things that I used to know the world around me. And I wonder what would happen for us if in this Lenten season, instead of trying to pile on to-do lists of things we've given up or things we want to adopt, or trying to force ourselves into a particular observance of a liturgical season as we think it should be, I wonder what might happen for us if instead of all that, we simply stopped trying to make it all make sense, and instead committed ourselves to showing up in each moment of each day, not anticipating another day in the pandemic, or dreading another Zoom call, or trying to kind of constantly exercise agency over every moment in an attempt to try to feel safe and secure. I wonder what would happen if we just showed up and let God do what God's going to do, and brought to bear in that moment not all that other stuff, but simply the gift of ourselves. So I think this is what I want to invite us to do this week as we continue in this Lenten season. I think I might like to invite us to a practice of not just speaking less or writing less, but actively using fewer words in our inner monologue and our outer monologues, to simply allow ourselves the discomfort of silence, to give God space to reach in and wrap us in arms of love that we so desperately need for healing and hope. I think I might like to invite us to cultivate the kind of silence that isn't caught up in trying to explain or anticipate what it is, but is simply present to what God is doing in that moment. At least I think that's what I'm going to be doing over these next couple of weeks, trying to use less words and rely less on my words to make sense of a world that, quite frankly, isn't always going to make sense. And I'm hoping, as I begin to experience this liberation in my own self, that perhaps that practice might offer you a little bit of liberation and hope as well. Thank you for joining with me today. I'm so glad to be with you. We were scheduled to have a member of the church with us today that was going to be speaking a little bit more about our Lenten devotional. We'll pick up that series again next week. But in the meantime, friends, we hope that you will continue to avail yourself of the full gift of all of our Lenten programming. You can find all of that on our website. If you go to foundryumc.org, there's a pop-up that comes up. You'll find out ways to download our devotional. You'll find ways to connect to our classes. We've got a couple of exciting retreats. There's a prayer retreat that our care ministry team is putting together a little bit later in March, as well as all kinds of other exciting things happening. So we hope that you will avail yourself of those gifts. We hope you'll continue to show up here on Facebook every day during the week as we have our pastors leading us through various reflections and devotions. Pastor Ginger will be with us tomorrow for her ponderings from the Purple Parlor, so we hope that you'll receive that gift. And as always, friends, remember that God loves you and that we love you. Remember to be gentle with yourself and gentle with those around you. And in all that you do, keep wandering toward wonder. Until next time, take good care. Bye-bye.